Hi everybody. A couple of weeks ago, I made a midweek video speaking about the spiritual darkness that so many of us are facing during these unprecedented and difficult times. We all feel anxiety and oppression and the spiritual darkness. And I made that video the week before the events that took place in Minneapolis. The events in which the police officer killed George Floyd, the cries of injustice, the protesting, the rioting, and now the movement spreading to kind of chaos all throughout our nation. And I just keep looking at the darkness and division and hatred. And these are really hard times. Well, for the next few weeks, I want to speak to you about the spiritual darkness, but our need for joy and hope and beauty even in these dark days. Because I've thought about this. We think these are unprecedented times, but are they? Because all throughout human history, there has been evil and injustice and violence. There have been plagues and famines. There have been pandemics and sickness and tragedy and death. Our times are not unique. What is unique about our times is that we all have access to everything that is happening in the nation and the world in our pockets. See, up until 100 years ago, mass communication wasn't even a thing. Until the advent of the radio and the television, news traveled a lot slower. And before the Industrial Revolution, even slower than that. And now in the last decade, with the advent of the smartphone and social media, we are all bombarded with all of the latest evil and injustice and violence and tragedy and sickness, and it's overwhelming. I think so many people's stress and anxiety and fear is a result of knowing all that's going on in the world and not knowing what to do about it. And this is one of the problems of social media. We see all of this, and then what can we do? Well, all we can do is post and respond. And this is why so many people are so anxious and angry on social media, because it's like we need to do something because there's these bad things happening. What do we do? And we respond, but then the world doesn't really change. The evil's still out there. My post didn't really make a difference. I feel all this pressure to do and say things, but what can I do and what can I say? Because the reality is I'm pretty small, and my influence is pretty small. And I don't think I'm going to see beauty and joy in these times unless I first recognize my smallness. Now, what I don't want to say is that I'm not insignificant, and you're not insignificant. We are precious and made in the image of God, and that's where joy and beauty really begin. You are valuable, but you can't take on the entire world. See, before the advent of mass media, people lived pretty small and local lives. Think about the pre-industrial revolution farmer, which is what most people did. Like the whole world was agricultural. Well, what if this person wanted to change the world, what would they do? Well, the farmer would have to plow his land, to plant his seed, to hope and pray that there would be a crop. Why? To feed his family so that they could survive. He would often serve his wife and his children. The families served together, and then families served the community, and they did the best to build the best community they could. Why? Because that was their way of doing the best they could to change the world. But we live in the day of celebrity. So what you and I want to do, we want to have power and influence. So we look to politicians and we look to celebrities that have a lot of power and a lot of influence. And they have their public platform. And so we think that if we had a public platform, that we could really set things right. But things continue to spiral and be depressing and broken. Well, every once in a while, I feel like God gives us what we need to see to teach us all what we need to do. And I believe he did this in the person of Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was a simple Roman Catholic nun serving as a missionary in Calcutta, India. And for quite a few years, she served as a teacher in that role, trying to faithfully serve God as a teacher. But over time, God began to call her to the poorest of the poor. She sensed God saying, leave the comfort of your convent and go out and minister to the most broken. And so she set out to serve faithfully the poorest of the poor in Calcutta, India. And for many years, she touched the lepers, she loved the dying, she fed the hungry in complete anonymity. Nobody knew. Then in the 1970s, she was discovered. There was a documentary made, and news began to circulate about this simple woman who had lived a life taking the vow of poverty, serving in this simple way faithfully. And she became world renowned and famous. But what's interesting is Mother Teresa never set out to change the entire world. She never set out to change India or even Calcutta. She just set out to care for the poor people that she saw every day as she walked the streets, one person at a time. And yet God magnified her work to teach us all something. But what so many people did, they saw this beautiful ministry of Mother Teresa. They fell in love with it. And they were like, Mother Teresa, how can we take what you're doing and do it all around the world? And let's, turn it into the Mother Teresa Corporation. We can apply these principles and change the whole world. And she never had anything to do with that. Mother Teresa knew that you couldn't take what she was doing and multiply it to change the entire world, because it all started with one person at a time, the person in front of her. She said this one time. She said, I see Jesus in every human being. And I say to myself, this is hungry Jesus. I must feed him. This is sick Jesus. This one has leprosy and gangrene. I must wash him and tend to him. I serve because I love Jesus. Simple thing in front of her. In Mother Teresa, in doing the simple thing, she did change the world. Mother Teresa elsewhere said this, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. It starts with love. Mother Teresa said this, said, you want to change the world? If you really want to change the world, go home and love your family. See, that's not the stuff of Hollywood. It's not the stuff of celebrity. But it is where we can begin to do the simple and faithful thing every day, every week, to do the good and beautiful things here and now. And this is where God is calling you, and it's where God is calling me. He is not calling me to be Jesus Christ and redeem the whole world. Jesus has already come. He is calling me to love my wife, to love my children, to love my neighbors, to love my community, and to be faithful every day to do those things. That's where I'm called. That's where you are called. And if enough people do that, God begins to transform the world as we are just trying to do simple and faithful things for him. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he guide you and encourage you in these hard days. And may you do simple and faithful and beautiful things right in front of you every day for the glory of God.